Good morning, everyone. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 18, 2018, the committee is resuming its study of supporting families after the loss of a child. Today, the committee will hear from department officials. With us today, we have from the Department of Employment and Social Development, Michael McPhee, Director General, Employment Insurance Program and Service Oversight, Transformation and Integrated Service Management Branch. And we have Rutha Astravaz, Director, Special Benefits, Employment Insurance Policy, Skills and Employment. Welcome to both of you. Also from Statistics Canada, we have Ron Gravel, Acting Director, Health Statistics Division, and Valerie Gaston, Chief Vital Statistics, Health Statistics Division. Welcome and thank you to all of you for being here this morning on this wonderful fall weather day. I'd like to open up the opening remarks. 7 minutes, please, from either Michael or Rutha. You have the next 7 minutes are all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good morning, bonjour. Je m'appelle Rutha Astravaz.
My name is Rutha Astravaz.
It's for Employment Insurance Policy at the Department of Employment and Social Development. As you said, joining me is Mike McPhee, my colleague from Service Canada. Je suis heureuse ou bon apprécie.
I am thankful for the opportunity to appear again and address this committee on this important issue and build on previous discussions.
Canadians who lose an infant child to sudden or unexpected causes, including in the case of sudden infant death syndrome or SIDS. It is hard to imagine the suffering families experience when they lose a child suddenly or unexpectedly, and yet some share their deeply personal experiences at this committee. We've paid close attention to these hearings, focusing on supporting families after the loss of a child, and we're thankful for the evidence shared by families, non-governmental organizations, including support networks across Canada, hearing from Canadian and international researchers. We've shared the concerns and suggestions with our service delivery counterparts. In particular, I acknowledge the challenges that parents must face in grieving the loss of their child and maintaining their emotional and physical well-being while trying to return to work. It's tragic to consider that in 2014 alone, there were approximately 1,800 total infant deaths and 3,200 stillbirths, according to Statistics Canada.
During a previous committee appearance, we presented an overview of employment insurance benefits that could support parents who lost their child, as well as recent changes to make the employment insurance program more flexible and inclusive for maternity, parental, and caregiving benefits.
We explain that EI maternity benefits continue to be payable in the tragic event that a child passes away because they're paid in relation to the mother's recovery from pregnancy and childbirth. We also explain that parental benefits payments, they end in the week of the death of the child, as care for the child is no longer required. And we heard concerns about that policy, which is reflected in the Employment Insurance Act. We also highlighted that the sickness benefit provides income support to claimants who are unable to work due to illness or injury, including incapacity due to emotional or psychological distress, the likes of which a parent may suffer following the death of a child. While there are no EI benefits specifically to cover a period of bereavement, grieving parents are eligible to receive up to 15 weeks of EI sickness benefits, provided that they obtain a medical note. The note must be signed by a medical practitioner and indicate the period during which the claimant is unable to work. This is separate from existing unpaid bereavement leave under federal or provincial territorial labor codes or employer-paid leaves. Other supports are available to parents and families through federal initiatives promoting public health of Canadian workers, parents, and children, information campaigns and research regarding SIDS, infant health and safety, occupational health and safety programs for workers overall and during pregnancy and nursing. Nous avons entendu des témoignages sur l'importance.
We heard from witnesses about the importance of easy-to-find information of what to do when a family member dies, and making the reporting process simpler and less intrusive.
Service Canada is the main point of contact to report a death to the federal government, or that a death occurred in the territories or outside of Canada. On their website, you can find information on what to do in the event of the loss of a family member. Families residing in one of the provinces also need to notify the province of their residence. We've heard how traumatic the loss of a child may be for families. We also know that it takes a variety of supports to respond to their needs. That may include community supports, grief counseling, as well as government programs. As we've described, the EI program provides a range of supports to qualifying workers, and changes that have been made to make them more flexible. With that, I look forward to your questions on the program and its delivery, as well as any suggestions for improvement. Merci.
Thank you very much. And now from Statistics Canada, Ron Gravel, Acting Director, Health Statistics Division, and Valerie Gaston, Chief Vital Statistics, Health Statistics Division. 7 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ron Gravel, and I'm the Director of Health Statistics Division at Statistics Canada. I'm here with my colleague Valerie Gaston, Chief of Vital Statistics. I would like to thank the committee for inviting us to appear today in the context of your study of support to families after the loss of a child.
The presentation will provide information on youth mortality in Canada and will focus on infant deaths. We'll start by providing some context to explain how the presentation evolved. Statistics Canada currently holds information on home care, caregiving, on care receiving for long-term health condition. Unfortunately, after a careful review, we can confirm that these data holdings do not contain information in response to the committee's request for information on support to parents after the loss of a child. These holdings also do not contain enough information on the profile of the children in regards to the conditions to support this request. However, Statistics Canada does have data on stillbirths and deaths of children in Canada. We will highlight some of the information available on these deaths. The key messages for the presentation today are: infant deaths less than 1 year old represents more than half of all youth deaths, that is 19 years and under. Neonates less than 1 year old represents more than half of all infants deaths, and the total number of stillbirths, that is fetal deaths, has increased over the last 25 years. On slide 3, I'm showcasing what is decentralized system of civil registration and vital stats, just to give you the context. Canada's national vital statistics system is based on the cooperation and collaboration between the 13 provincial and territorial vital statistics registers and the federal government represented by Statistics Canada. L'enregistrement civil des naissances.
Civil registration of births, deaths, stillbirths, and marriages are the responsibility of the provinces and territories. Each provincial and territorial register operates under its own provincial or territorial Vital Statistics Act. The collection and dissemination of national vital statistics are the responsibility of Canada's Central Statistical Agency. Statistics Canada is legislated under the Federal Statistics Act.
So I will take over from here. The next slide that we'll be looking at is a chart that identifies the breakdown of youth deaths in Canada by age group in 2016. So there were 267,000 deaths in 2016, and of these, 3,120 were youths aged between 0 and 19 years. This represents 1% of all deaths. As you can see by the largest section in light blue, 56% of all youth deaths occurred in infants. Children aged 5 to 9 years, in gray, is representing the smallest proportion of youth deaths at 5%. The proportion of deaths occurring in each age group to overall youth deaths has remained consistent over the past 25 years. La prochaine acétate décrit.
The next slide describes the trend in youth deaths in Canada since 1991 across the different age groups. Over the last 25 years, youth deaths have decreased across all age groups. Infant deaths contribute most to this overall decline, with a reduction of 832 deaths.
I will now describe the differences in youth mortality rate across the provinces and territories, and this is on slide 6. In the table, cells in red indicate rates above the Canadian average, cells in yellow rates equal to the Canadian average, and cells in green rates that are below the Canadian average. The variability in mortality rates is greatest in infants, with rates ranging between 3.5 in British Columbia and 17.7 in Nunavut. In the table, 2 provinces stand out due to trends in their youth mortality rates. Saskatchewan rates are above the Canadian average for each age group, while Quebec is the only jurisdiction where rates are equal to or below the Canadian average for each age group. La prochaine diapositive.
The next slide shows the trend in infant deaths by age group from 1991 to 2016. Infant deaths under 1 year have decreased in all age groups with the exception of the under 1 day age group. The greatest drop in the number of deaths occurred in infants 1 to 11 months old. The number went from 935 in 1991 to 450 in 2016. Both the 1 to 11 month and the 1 to 6 day age groups experienced the greatest relative decreases, that is 51%.
The following chart shows the breakdown of infant deaths by age group, and here we are on slide number 8. Overall, 1,741 infants died in 2016. Almost 3/4 of these deaths occurred in infants under 1 month, and over half of all infant deaths occurred to neonates less than 1 day old. Finally, the number of infant deaths tend to decrease with age, with the fewest number of deaths occurring in the 6 to 11 months age group. We'll now shift our focus to the leading causes of deaths in Canada. This is slide number 9. The following bar graph identifies the 5 leading causes of infant deaths in 2016. Most infant deaths are the result of congenital malformations, deformations, and chromosomal abnormalities, followed by deaths due to short gestation and low birth weight. Although sudden infant death syndrome is not part of the list of leading causes in 2016, it was part of the top 5 leading causes of death historically. As of 2012, this concept is no longer used by most certifiers in Canada. As a result, it's no longer possible to compile the number of SIDS deaths occurring in Canada. The deaths once confirmed as SIDS can now be found in the unknown category. La prochaine acétate.
Next slide. In 2017, there were 3,159 stillbirths in Canada, and less than 1/3 of these deaths occurred at a gestation of 28 weeks or more. Although the total number of stillbirths has been on the rise since 1991, the number of late fetal deaths, that is after 28 weeks, has actually decreased to 23%.
Acétate.
The last slide shows us the stillbirth and perinatal death rates are variable across the provinces and territories. We see this changes depending on the provinces and territories. The Atlantic provinces have rates equal to or below the Canadian average, with the exception of Prince Edward Island, where the perinatal rate is above Canada's average. Quebec and Alberta have rates below the Canadian average, while Ontario, Manitoba, and the territories have rates above the Canadian average. Although British Columbia has a perinatal mortality rate below the Canadian average, the stillbirth rate is the highest among the provinces. Saskatchewan has a stillbirth rate below the Canadian average, but its perinatal death rate is above the Canadian average.
That's the information we have to present to you today. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. And up first for questions, MP Barlow, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the department officials for being here with us today. Ms. Astrovas, for a second time, I believe you were here earlier, and I appreciate you taking the time. I just have a couple of questions, I guess, first on the Statistics Canada information, and this is more for my not knowing some of these things, but what was Ms. Gaston, the reason for the SIDS definition to be changed and just to be unknown? Was there a clinical change there, or something from the health sector that caused that change? I'm just wondering if if there is no designation for SIDS, just to put it as unknown. I'm just wondering what the reason for that was.
So the SIDS, or sudden infant deaths or sudden and unexpected deaths, would be investigated by the coroners and medical examiners. And so through their discussions, the investigations, so the definition of SIDS, I have it here, but it's essentially after all the investigations, they've done an autopsy, they've looked at everything, they cannot conclude what the infant died of. So because it was a diagnostic of exclusion, it became like a nomenclature. Giving it a title, a cause of death, as SIDS is really it's really nothing. Not nothing, but it's unknown. Right. So those cases are still in the statistics. We can get them under the unknown category. They're just no longer headed as SIDS.
Right. So they didn't want to give a title to a death that they really couldn't answer. They don't know what was the cause, so it was becoming maybe a bit easy to say, I don't want to say easy, but SIDS was kind of a misnomer in terms of there really was no definitive cause of death that they can figure out, so unknown was a better term, I guess. Is sort of
that's how they felt. I can't really
sorry.
I
don't mean to be
yes.
putting you on the spot. I was just curious for my own. I hadn't heard that before, so I was curious if there was a reason why that does make some sense. I could see that. The other question I wanted to ask Mr. Gravel or Ms. Gaston, I can't remember who was talking about it, but you were talking about the decrease in the number of infant deaths over the years from 1991 to 2016. I'm going to make the assumption that improvements in healthcare and technology have been a part of that, but is there any definitive data in terms of why that is the case, that we've seen that steady decline, except for that one area where it's been a bit more fluctuating in 1 day or less, or one year or less, I guess it was.
And I think we didn't focus much on the, sorry, I took this, we didn't focus much on the older age groups, but there's a lot of decreases in accidents. I think, as you were saying, some improvements in safety and could account for some of the decreases that we've seen.
Okay. I'm just on the definition of a stillborn. Does that include a late-term miscarriage? Or what would be the, it's I think the number you had in there. Just so I'm going to look at one of these graphs here. Under 1 day. Now, does under 1 day include pre-birth? Like, would a late-term miscarriage be included in that, or would that be something entirely different?
Yeah, so it becomes very complex because there's all these different terms for different periods. So the perinatal, on the last slide, we talked about the perinatal mortality rate, and perinatal would include your late-term stillborns, I guess, the 28 weeks plus, and also the live births up to 6 days. Okay.
So was there, and again in that last slide, there has been a trend down, except for those that were 1 day or less. Is there a reason that we're seeing that increase? Do we have any? That was on page 10.
So on slide 10, the increase?
Yeah, the total number of stillbirths has increased since 91. Do we have sort of a direction on why that would be?
So I would prefer, I think, suggesting that colleagues at the Public Health Agency answer those questions, because we don't have the background or the expertise in that field to really offer a.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. If you're not sure, I don't expect you to take a wild guess. No, that's okay. We're here to try and get some information, and that's totally fine. I appreciate that. Now for Service Canada, Mr. McPhee and Ms. Astrovis, I know you may have heard some of these questions when you were here before, but I'm not sure if we got to all of them. One of the things that we've certainly heard over and over again from the stakeholders is the need for a one-door-in resource, either a website or a dedicated phone line. Is this something that Service Canada has discussed before? Is this something that is a possibility? that just seems to be one real common denominator that we've heard from stakeholders, is that when they are dealing with this, there's a lot of confusion on where to go to access programs. We've certainly heard the stories of people having to go to the bank and repay EI, things like that. I'm just wondering, is there a possibility to have a one-stop shop, for lack of a better description, or a dedicated phone line, dedicated website for infant death and bereavement?
Brief answer, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
It certainly does form part of the larger work that we are undertaking at Service Canada as it relates to sort of modernizing the way we deliver services and moving away from sort of a siloed service delivery model program by program to a more coordinated or one-stop shop approach, as you've sort of suggested. So to this point, certainly within the sort of medium-term plans around how we more effectively reduce the burden on clients and all clients for that matter, and facilitate their access to the programs and engagement with the department.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to pursue the question raised by my colleague, Mr. Barlow, because in all the hearings to date and the witnesses that appeared, there was this, what I termed, three themes that came about or was given, which financial distress at a difficult time in a person's life. The big thing, which as government should be concerned about, was the insensitive structure to navigate. That being no one particular door to go to, and EI was part of the Service Canada. There was a number of the child benefits in those, and that each case is slightly unique. They're not the same. So clearly, and I've experienced this in my constituency. Even if I focus on employment insurance, it is not simple. It's cumbersome at a very difficult time. So how is Service Canada going to deal with this? It's been identified that there should be one line dedicated to persons, so that people are trained on dealing with individuals that are suffering in this case, and it can't be different from region to region. That's been a big issue that's been brought to this committee, and it's an issue, quite frankly, that should be resolved by government, and it should have been resolved by now. So could you comment on that briefly? Because there's a patchwork of delivery. It's not simple to navigate, and I see it in look in your comments where statistics are wonderful. It takes this much time on average to get here, get there, and everywhere, but that's not the real world. It is a cumbersome, insensitive system to navigate, and quite frankly, if I look at the testimony that was given here this morning, is that bereavement is not allowed, but if you get the doctor to say, well, you may not be feeling good or something, we'll put you on that. Bereavement should be part of the system that triggers EI benefits for sickness and that. But the ability, and this does occur, people are, well, if you put this on, you're not eligible, but simply get the doctor to say you're not feeling well or under distress. We shouldn't be forcing people to provide information that's totally not accurate.
I can start with responding to, you've raised a number of different issues. I think it's important to note that the EI program is a very large program, and we've designed benefits for really, when we talk about the special benefits, two types of cases. One is for the recovery of the worker, him or herself, so maternity or sickness. And then we have a second set, the more recent special benefits, which are about caregiving. So parental benefits, family caregiver benefits, compassionate care benefits. And it's that second category. Those cease when the person you care for dies. And we have heard from stakeholders about the need for bereavement, both here at this committee, but also in the context of compassionate care benefits. In fact, we had heard
Sorry, just on one, what would be the cost expanding it to bereavement as a separate category, as its own category?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question. But what I can say is when you do talk about the challenges of navigating the system, we do provide as much information as we can on our websites, as well as in guides to claimants what they need to do while on claim. And we do ask them to contact Service Canada as soon as possible if their circumstances change. But just adding to your comment about how things are designed and what we try to do, we do always take concerns of claimants and Canadians seriously. But at committees like this, we can't comment on specific cases of what kinds of decisions were made or how that was done. What we can say, though, is that when it comes down to the sickness benefit, we don't ask the cause of the illness. The medical certificate simply states when you expect to return to work. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Thanks.
Yes, and I appreciate the fact where the policy comes from, but really a lot of what I heard is simply justification for the status quo, but that does not rest with the people speaking. I want to go. How much time have I got left? A program, the Canadian Benefit for Parents of Young Victims of Crime, is interesting when I read about this particular program. It was not referenced a lot that I recall with any witnesses that came in, but it's one that's been suggested could be a model for dealing with parents in the loss of a child. Could you explain a bit of this particular program?
So the Parents of Young Victims of Crime is a grant. It is not part of the employment insurance program. It's a separate benefit administered by Service Canada.
Is it a one-time? But administered by Service Canada? Is it a one-time payment?
It is a one-time payment, from what I understand, based on the circumstances. In terms of it's a one-time occurrence based on an event, which is due to a probable criminal cause. However, it's a weekly benefit.
Where does the funding come from for the 6,500? Is my time out?
Your time's out, I'm sorry.
But could you get the 6,500? I'd like to know where does that come from? The payment money, where does it come from within government?
So it is a grant.
Yeah.
But from where? Service Canada?
It's from it's a voted grant, and it's paid via Service Canada directly to individuals on a weekly basis.
Thank you. Madame Sanssouci, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Statistics Canada for giving us these important data that has to be part of our report. Ms. Astravas, I was very pleased to hear you very closely followed the hearings of our committee. I think that you, like we did, heard the needs of these parents who are experiencing bereavement, as well as that of experts who talked about the relevancy of the time that these parents need to grieve. I think in your conclusion, you put your finger on the difficulties experienced by saying that the range of support programs was for eligible workers. That is the heart of what we're doing as a committee. All parents experiencing bereavement need it in its current form. The EI program, and from what I've heard, is not the best program for these parents. It's for the 40% of workers who are eligible, and if we look at it, it's the average. If we look at women who are necessarily affected by the death of a child, we're talking about 35% who are eligible. A number of witnesses have also told us that the process at Service Canada is really made for people who have lost their jobs, but they had to make their claim 2 or 3 times. They were determined not eligible, and their request was rejected. They also felt that they had to wait in a lineup at Service Canada with people who had lost their jobs. But for them, it was difficult to be part of this process given their reality. Other witnesses, women in particular, told us that they were not eligible for EI after their maternity leave. Given these challenges, well, your presentation said, well, here's what we have after hearing you. Have you considered, should we think about other types of programs outside of employment insurance to ensure that all 100% of these parents experiencing this type of bereavement be eligible for benefits? Thank you. I did hear a number of themes in your comments. To start, I'd like to address the issue of coverage and eligibility. This is something that we did mention in our last appearance as well. There are a number of ways to calculate and to look at what coverage for workers is. At Statistics Canada last week, the last report on the coverage was published, and there's more information in this report on that issue. With regard to offering programs under EI or otherwise, there is always the possibility of having new programs. This is something that I am not able to comment on as working at employment insurance. I understand, but you are part of that department. We know that the EI fund has a clear mission. It is for people who lose their jobs to give training opportunities, and I think the more time goes by, the further it gets from its original mission. My question then is, do you feel within the department in which you work that there is openness? The healthcare needs are increasing. It's not the subject of our study, but we know that with 1 out of 2 Canadians at risk for cancer, even with regard to illness, there is a limit to what we can take from the EI fund. There are a number of witnesses who talked to us about the number of weeks. In the last meeting, there was a psychologist who said at least 15 to 20 weeks are needed and to have some flexibility with regard to this, the number of weeks. Bereavement sometimes does not happen at the moment of the event, but afterwards. Have you thought about recommendations on the number of weeks specifically related to bereavement? Because it is a specific type of sickness leave. We do not have recommendations. We're here to answer technical questions about the program. I do have technical questions. Could you tell us how many people have requested special benefits over the last 5 years for this situation, meaning the death of a child? How many families got special benefits in the past 5 years for this situation before us, that is the death of a child? How many weeks have been used by these parents? How many families had 15 weeks, that is, got the maximum number of weeks, and how many would have needed more weeks than more than 15 weeks? With regard to sickness benefits, we don't know the reason why they are claiming the benefit. We don't have the data to respond to that question, whether it's for bereavement or the death of a child. With regard to maternity benefits, there too, we do not have the information as to whether the child died or not, because the benefits continue to be paid. Maternity benefits are for the mother. But we do have statistics as to how many benefits have been paid, the duration, the maximum duration, but we don't have the reasons or the subcategories as you have requested. But for the benefit of a report, you could provide us, thank you, Mr. Chair, with the data on the use of the 15 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and good morning to our witnesses. Thank you for your testimony this morning. First to Mr. McPhee, can you talk to what if any, sensitivity training or any training that Service Canada offers their employees to deal with people, parents, situations that call who are obviously distraught, who are grieving. I certainly understand and respect the fact that the people that answer the phone at Service Canada take, hundreds, thousands upon thousands of calls. But sometimes through the testimony we've heard back that, it was a little insensitive. And I just wondered, is there any programs or anything that Service Canada offers? Maybe Ms. Astrovis, you can comment on that too. But Mr. McPhee, is there anything that Service Canada offers to employees to be better equipped for that type of situation?
So there are certainly trainings that are provided to all of our staff, regardless of whether they're call centers in person or even the processing staff, around client service and service delivery to sensitize them to these issues. Now, having said that, these are not issues that are frequent. Fortunately, these are not issues that we frequently do have to deal with. So the fact that they occur so rarely does mean that from time to time the staff may be caught off guard with them. But we certainly do have a training program specific to dealing with clients in all sorts of circumstances that we provide to them, and further. Sorry.
Yep. Sorry, no, you go ahead. My apologies.
We also do have a quality monitoring program whereby we regularly, listen to the engagements between staff and clients to ensure that the quality of the interactions are what we would want them to be.
And I understand that, and I guess I'm just looking for ways and opportunities to improve. I mean, certainly from an MP and MP's office, we deal with all kinds of situations and people coming in, but specifically with parents that are grieving. Do you see an opportunity for more specific training for Service Canada employees to deal with those specific situations? And you also mentioned that you do monitor calls, and I certainly know that. What do you find? What are you finding out of that?
So I certainly see that there is always an opportunity for us to improve the way that we engage our clients. And that it's important for us not to have a single brushstroke by which we sort of try to interact with all of them, and we need to ensure that our staff are sensitive to the specific needs of our clients. It's definitely a piece of work that we want to take away and explore further to determine how we can not isolate, but sort of more effectively target these smaller groups within that large volume of inquiries.
Separate number maybe, or
some sort of mechanism whereby we can ensure that we effectively manage those interactions and reduce the burden on the clients.
Okay. Have you heard feedback before that maybe Service Canada wasn't as sensitive? Is this new to you, or is this something you've been aware of?
I mean, we certainly, when you're in the service industry, you certainly always hear that there feedback, both positive and negative. So for me to say that I had never heard that, would.
Thank you. Ms. Astrovis, I hope I said that right. We've heard some testimony in the past about the definition of grief found in Service Canada's website. You've heard it in actually the last meeting and the one prior. One researcher who appeared was particularly concerned that as it stands now, it contributes to the medicalization of grief and may have the unintended consequence of creating a hierarchy of types of grief. Can you provide us with some background on how the definition for grief was created?
I'm not aware of a specific definition of grief. Certainly within the Employment Insurance Act and regulations, we do not refer to any kind of bereavement or grief.
Nothing on the website?
I personally am not aware.
Okay. We've also heard some concern from witnesses that an EI-based support system for those who suffer the loss of an infant would risk excluding those in precarious employment situations. In your view, is it possible to create an EI-based bereavement benefit program that is truly universal?
So the employment insurance program, it's paid for by contributions from employers and workers. and it does have eligibility and qualifying criteria that are common to all the different EI types of benefits, regular benefits, special benefits. It is therefore not universal because you need to qualify when you make an application.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm good, Chair.
MP Senga, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have heard many witnesses, they came, somebody say that 15 weeks are enough, somebody says 12 weeks. So different type of bereavement benefits are suggested. And we know it's going to be linked with the EI. So how feasible it would be, such program is feasible? How you feel that it is feasible, that program is possible, that 12 weeks can be possible?
So, what if I understand your question? You're asking, is it possible to create a new benefit, and how would you determine how long?
Yes, please.
So that is something that would have to be proposed and studied separately. I personally cannot comment on that. I don't have the information to make that kind of determination.
Is it possible to have it, or you can suggest that, oh no, it's not possible, no 12 week can be granted, there's no feasibility? Do you think there's a feasibility?
I think that the testimonies we heard at this committee have been really important to building our knowledge base on these various issues. However, I can't comment about creating a new benefit.
Okay. How you feel that administratively one person who has to apply for that benefits, what type of different type of applications or other forms which he has to fill up? Is it going to be very cumbersome, or is going to be very easy for him to make a claim?
So if you're referring to employment insurance benefits, they all have a common base of applying for employment insurance, and then each benefit type has specific additional requirements. So in our earlier comments, we talked about the sickness benefit. You need a medical certificate to be signed that has certain parameters, which is separate than the medical certificate required, let's say, for the compassionate care benefit. It's a different EI benefit, but at the base, even just to apply for EI, there's a common set of requirements.
So will this be a separate branch, or it will be one among that EI people, those who are dealing with the EI, they will be dealing with this one?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Will there be a separate set of people, those who will be dealing with the bereavement benefits, or same EI benefit people will be dealing with this?
So first of all, I'm not commenting on creating a new benefit altogether, but just to say that all of the EI benefits have a common website, a common call center, processing centers, because they're all part of the EI program.
Again, regarding the cost of this, last time you told that you cannot comment on that, but could you tell that existing EI contribution system, do it support these benefits?
So we've explained what benefits do currently exist. But I'm sorry, I'm not really sure what you were asking.
This new type of benefits, bereavement benefits, will be provided to the people, those who are entitled to. So do you think this contribution, which is already EI is giving, we are giving EI to the people, is it the same set of contribution, or the amount of the people those will be claiming, or extra money has to be entitled, allotted to that?
So if the recommendation were to create a brand new benefit, it would have to have its own terms and conditions and establish what would be offered. Otherwise, we're looking, and maybe this is what you're also thinking about, is in terms of the leaves. Under the Canada Labour Code, which is a separate piece of legislation, we have unpaid leaves. There are many more types of leaves than there are EI benefits. There currently exists a bereavement leave under the federal Canada Labour Code, and there exists bereavement leaves under provincial and territorial labour codes as well. Those are, but that's separate from the EI program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here today. I have a couple questions. I want to go back to my colleague John Barlow to Stats Canada, because I'm a little confused with the concept of not using the term SIDS anymore. So since 2012. So I am mother of two. I had my first child in 2013. And SIDS was definitely a term that was used by nurses, by doctors, and from what I understand is sudden infant death syndrome is you wake up and your child is dead. That's what it is. So I'm just confused why it's going into an unknown category if SIDS is it's unknown. We know that we don't know the cause of it. So I'm just trying to understand why there's that gap.
So essentially, it's the decision is based on what we refer to the National Association of Medical Examiners, and it's strictly an administrative based definition. So the SID concept obviously still exists. As we move into the world of administrative data, I mentioned earlier, we are consuming the information from the registers. So it's a recommendation that came upon from the National Association of Medical Examiners. These changes were made to the coding on the at the register level, and we received this information. So it's really it's absolutely not to undermine the reality of SIDS. It's a conceptual definition that was actually made at some point there.
Yeah, it's just confusing to me, I guess, as a mom with young kids, because I understand SIDS can happen age 0 to 4. So, having a child die in the middle of the night with no explained reasons. So I guess I'm just, I just don't get it. Like, it just seems like an unknown like SIDS is SIDS, right? It's unknown, the cause of that.
It's the fact is according to our understanding is that the SID, the explanation is unknown. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why it was moving to an already existing category, which is called unknown. So it's when they go through the investigation, they're trying to rule out different causes. SID is one where it's essentially there's no other explanation than that. So it was felt that under those circumstances, because it was considered unknown in the context of the timelines of the child's age and so on, and the circumstances, it was felt that it would be moved under the general category of unknown.
Okay, thank you. My next question would be for Service Canada. So I'm wondering, we had heard lots of testimony of language. The language on the websites is being unacceptable. It's very cold, harsh, non-compassionate, not empathetic. I'm wondering if there is openness to addressing that gap of language that is on the website.
And as a matter of fact, it's one of the projects that we have just recently undertaken in terms of doing a comprehensive review of all of our public-facing content to ensure that it's more client-centric in nature and really is framed with an appreciation for the circumstances that someone may be in. Therefore, it needs to be more intuitive, focused on a client's needs, and more readable and understandable. So we are actually in the process of undertaking work on that now and doing consultations to ensure that it's properly framed.
Okay, thank you. I also want to follow up on a question that my colleague Mr. Long had asked. Regarding the sensitivity training, is that mandatory training for every single employee that works at Service Canada?
It's a portion of the initial onboarding training that does take
So,
place.
so
yes.
every employee would receive.
Every public-facing
Okay.
employee.
And so I don't know if I interjected this into my own thoughts when I was listening, but had you mentioned that sometimes calls are recorded for service quality?
No, calls
No?
are not recorded at this.
So how do you monitor how the staff are treating clients?
It's what we call silent monitoring, whereby as the call is actually taking place, there's another individual who listens in on the call as it's currently happening.
Okay. And so what happens in a situation where a Service Canada representative treats a client inappropriately, insensitively and that type of thing? Like, what would be the process?
It would be, their feedback would be provided to the individual to ensure that they understand their role, their functions, the way in which they should be engaging. And follow-ups would be done to ensure that there were no further issues.
Is there ever training that, do people ever need to go for extra training, sensitivity training?
I think there's always a value in refreshing these sorts of things. It's very easy to sort of, receive the training, but with everything else going on at a given point in time, require a refresh in order to ensure that you're fully focused on all of your functions.
Would Service Canada be willing to have their employees be retrained every 5 years or whatnot as a refresher course?
It's certainly something that we can take away and look at as part of our larger service excellence program.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And MP Morrissey, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to part of the questioning that was this morning, focuses on the point of first access, which is a call-in number. Do you think it would be feasible for Service Canada to have a separate portal, a separate call-in number dealing with bereavement issues?
It's certainly something that we can look at. We'd want to make sure that we were designing it in such a way that it truly facilitated things, because you want to make sure you've got that balance between that deep program knowledge and the sort of specific skill set that you're speaking about in terms of dealing with these specific clients. But certainly something that we intend to take away and look at.
So it's not out of possibility, isn't it? It's a reasonable. It would be a reasonable position to. For Service Canada to undertake to have a separate response center for areas on if an individual were going through a bereaving process or they had the loss of family, where they would call, and this center could provide information on what type of benefits they may be eligible, because a lot of time people are not aware of what benefits they're entitled to, even within the limited scope that we have currently, but that they could give them this in a free and open process and guide them through the process without having to go to, because you are correct, call centers are dealing with a host of issues, which bereavement would be thankfully a small part of when you look at the EI system. But that was a consistent theme, so it's one that I that's why I posed the question, is would it be a reasonable service for Service Canada to explore?
Yeah, so just to sort of close on that, certainly as we look forward to the way we deliver services writ large, we certainly want to make sure that we are capable of offering a more tailored service, and that would include these types of circumstances such that we are more effectively facilitating the process for those individuals.
Chair's not paying attention, so I get more time. I want to go back to the, and you may not be able to answer them, but the young victims of crime. it's referenced as the 35-week benefit. So is the $6,500 broken down over a 35-week period? Are both of you knowledgeable on this particular program that's administered by Service Canada?
I'm trying to do the quick math in my head, but we've made recent changes to it, and
You made
so
changes. What are those changes?
It was to increase the rate to $450.
So it's a weekly benefit administered by Service Canada. It does not necessarily come out of the EI fund.
It does not.
Does not. So it's out of general revenue. Interesting. And what's the eligibility criteria?
So that is a grant for parents whose child is missing or has died as a result of a probable criminal code offense. So looking at abductions, at murders, etc. But I can't comment further. It is a separate grant, and it is administered.
How long has it been in place?
It was originally launched, I believe, in around 2013 or so. And it's been around, but recent changes were made this fall to that grant.
And how simplified is the process? Because it looks like it may be a model that you could look at for the loss of a child in other circumstances. How does parents, who introduces the family member to this particular program? How do they become aware of it?
So there's information on that grant on the departmental website, as well as links from Justice Canada, different victim services. I'm aware that the department has done engagement with different community supports, with different levels of government to make them aware of the grant and the corresponding leave that is offered.
I was not aware of it until I read the briefing notes, and I'm not sure if any the committee members may have been, but it's an interesting model to look at. So you're not aware of the eligibility criteria? It's simply the loss of a child?
I don't want to err on this because it is a separate grant and more
Could you
information
get the
is available.
information back to the committee?
We could follow up on that.
On the eligibility criteria, and I would like a little more specific, if you could, is how the information is processed to the parent. If you could provide that committee. How's my time, Chair?
30 seconds.
Oh, fine. You may not have this for Statistics Canada, but would you have a statistic on how long bereaved parents take before returning to work? Would this be information that Stats Canada may have?
It's not under the responsibility of my health statistics program, but I could look into it and get back to you guys.
If you could answer that question, and at the same time, in your experience, do bereaved family members return to doing the same job or kind of work as they did before? And the other part I would like if you could provide to committee is what effect does the death of a child have on long-term labor force attachment of a parent?
Okay. Thank you. MP Richards, for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Has Service Canada or the Department of Employment and Social Development done any research on implementing anything that's being done in this study or through the motion that preceded the study? Has any research been done at all?
I think the simple answer is no. We are coming to this committee also to learn, but also to present what is currently available.
Okay. Was there any briefing note provided to the minister about this that you're aware of?
So as part of the motions process, there is a position paper that is prepared which analyzes the text of the motion.
Okay. Is there anything in that in the background work that was done for that could be provided to this committee?
I'm not aware of what is or isn't provided to parliamentarians, but I will ask departmental officials to look into that.
Okay, if you could please check into that and provide through, I guess, our clerk anything that can be provided to this committee for our information. That would be appreciated. Thank you. The information that we are provided is that
there was in 2016, it was indicated, I think, this morning that 1,741 children under the age of 1 passed away in 2016. I wonder if you could tell me if Service Canada has had any experiences in dealing with those people, and how many of those people Service Canada would have dealt with, in particular with regards to having benefits either canceled or changed.
We wouldn't have any of that information available at this point in time, but I mean, we'd have to look back through the information that we do have available.
Okay. So I guess I'm a little frustrated by that because, we've kind of heard this ongoing theme this morning that, most of the questions that have been asked, there's not an answer for. And, you knew you were coming here. You could probably anticipate the types of questions that we would ask. I would have thought that you would have done some preparation and been able to answer some of our questions. So that I do find that a little bit frustrating, frankly. And I would ask that you go back and please provide that back again to our committee through the clerk, the information on that, because it should be available to you. So please, if you could endeavor to get that back to this committee as well, that would be appreciated. Let me just turn to, I guess, it was discussed a little bit earlier, but the Young Victims of Crime grant. There was obviously, my understanding is that there is actually a specialized, either a phone line or a website, maybe both, I believe, for people that are experiencing that unfortunate circumstance. Is that accurate? Is that true? Is that something that there is available?
It is treated as a separate grant and is managed through a different group of resources, both from a processing perspective and from a call perspective. Yes.
Okay, so people do have a special dedicated line that they can call these kinds of things for that circumstance?
I have to confirm whether or not it is a special dedicated line specifically for parents of young victims of crime, or whether or not it's part of another service.
Okay, but
So
there is sort
confirm
of something specific that they're directed to, whether it's only dedicated to that or whether it's a part of something else. There is something specific. Okay, and I believe there is also a specific website or web page that's available to provide them with information as well.
There's certainly web content that is available specifically to the grant. Yes.
So how easy would it be to be able to replicate that for parents in this situation, bereavement? Would that be something that could be done quite easily?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's certainly a piece of work that we have already undertaken. Now, the difference here is the fact that with the parents of young victims of crime, the frame around that is a specific grant. In this context, you're talking about a specific group of individuals that are within a different program, but certainly a piece of work that, as I said, we've started to work on.
Okay. Now, the other thing I guess that I wanted to touch on is we've heard, and it's been mentioned a little bit this morning already as well, but we have heard, a number of times about sort of the experience in dealing with Service Canada from some of these parents. They've described it as a cold or clinical type of an experience. For example, we heard a story of a mother that was told, your child ceases to exist, so therefore the benefits cease to exist. Well, you can imagine how that must feel to hear that as a parent. We even heard a bit of that language this morning even. So I guess what I'm wanting to ask is, those kinds of situations where that happens, where a mother's told that she has to go into a bank to pay back benefits rather than do it online, that's apparently not something that was possible. Are those the kinds of things that you feel are acceptable? And I mean, I understand you've said that, there's monitoring that's done and things like that, but what's actually done in those kinds of cases where something like that happens? Like, an employee just continually can't seem to get this right. What's done about it?
Just a brief answer, please.
So, I would frame all of this from the perspective that anytime we receive feedback along these lines where this experience has been less than optimal, we take that to heart. And certainly in the context...
Does an employee ever face consequences?
Certainly.
What would that look like?
It would be, it could be a series of different things depending upon the severity of the situation that took place.
Thank you.
Okay, but can you give us an example or some ideas of what that would look like? Like what exactly would that be?
So
Series of
in a
things.
first instance, as I've indicated, you would have a case where probably increased monitoring would be taking place to ensure that they continue to deliver that. But there's a series of trainings that take place throughout the entire development of an individual that are designed to equip them with the skills to deal with the public.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Madam Sanssouci for 3 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be sure, because Mrs. Sastrava didn't have the time to answer my last question. I wanted to make sure that you will indeed provide us with how many special benefit weeks have been used over the last 5 years, how many individuals have used the maximum number of 15 weeks, and how many would have needed more than 15 weeks, please. My question, and I hope that I won't conclude as my colleague Mr. Richards did, and that you will be able to provide me with an answer, but in the document that has been prepared for us by the Library of Parliament, and I have a lot of admiration for what they've provided. They're talking about programs that fall under ESDC, special EI benefits, and another one called Young Victims of Crime Benefits. Before I ask my question about this other program, I am surprised because we always feel this is reliable, but in this list, we don't find the benefit that you talked about with my colleague, Mr. Morrissey, and I don't remember the exact name of that benefit. But I am having trouble understanding why they don't have this out of these programs. The allocation for victims of crime, that is the one you're talking about. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that this is the one we were talking about. What is interesting about this program, and earlier we talked about eligibility and broader eligibility, talking about 6,500 in earnings in the previous year. Minimum. You shouldn't have had EI benefits. Other people say we should expand the program to all parents who are experiencing the death of a child within a certain age or time period, no matter what the cause. Do you think that ESDC could simply expand this benefit so that more parents could be eligible? Thank you for that question. I represent EI, so I can comment, but I will give your comments to my colleagues. Chair, and I think my colleague, Mr. Mitchell, raised it. I think we realize that as the meeting goes on today, that ESDC have misassessed the extent of our motion, and you said that you looked at this carefully. I think it's unfortunate that Ms. Astra has to keep saying, I can't answer that, it doesn't come under her programs. We don't have the witnesses we need this morning to answer our questions, and it's unfortunate. At the first meeting where Mr. Brown, the Director General of EI programs, was present, he said there was an opening to help organizations that in turn helped individuals in need of special benefits and who were turning to those organizations for help. Since that meeting, has it been discussed whether these organizations can be helped? I will answer in English.
Employment insurance program for EI Part 1 benefits, it pays benefits directly to individuals. It does not pay them to organizations. What you are suggesting sounds like something that is different than what we currently do. So we thank you for your suggestion.
Merci.
Thank you. Now that takes us to the end of our second round. We do have the opportunity to go into drafting instructions. We're going to take advantage of that opportunity to do so. So we will need to suspend briefly before sir.
So when, the motion that I brought forward on Tuesday's meeting, my understanding of the response that we got, and I mean, I certainly welcome the opportunity to go to drafting instructions, because I do believe it should allow this committee the time to complete its report and table it before Christmas. But my understanding of the explanation that we received at that time was that it was just not possible to go to drafting instructions within 2 days from the time. And so now we're being told, well, gee, it is possible. So what actually is the problem here that we can't have this report done when it was directed to be done by the motion that was passed unanimously by the House of Commons, and within the time frame that we've seen other committees and this committee complete reports of the same kind of nature? I really am struggling to understand exactly what the problem is here to get this report done. And now this seems to be one of the things we were told was not possible, and it is. We're going to do it. So please explain to me, other than a desire not to do it, what is the problem here?
So as I mentioned last week, or last meeting, I should say, it's not an issue of desire, and I apologize if that was the impression, but the drafting instruction piece, which was scheduled for next Tuesday, was not necessarily the sticking point. There's a number of logistics, including translation, including the size of the study, including the just fact that we had yet to actually finish meeting with all witnesses. But we do have an opportunity right now to move to drafting instructions, and I would like to suspend so that we can do that.
So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate that, and we're more than welcome to do that, but I want to make it clear to everyone who's listening that those statements that have just been made are simply just not accurate. The facts do not bear them out, but we will certainly take that as a sign that there is not a will to do this, Mr. Chair, and you can make all the excuses you want, but that's the fact.
That is your opinion, sir.
That is the fact.
Thank you. Suspend.